this has to be one of the biggest questions out there, I think. What is the real origin of evil? And I'm sure it's something that we've all wondered about. Today we're sort of going to be delving into a pretty radical answer, and I think it is radical in the traditional sense of that meaning of that word, so far as the view that the heavenly doctrines provide us with. Um, so I guess fair warning, it's going to take us on a journey right into the heart of the self, our self concept. And that may mean sort of putting us a little bit in front of our own darkness. But it's an important topic, as I said, because once we better understand the origin and nature of evil as it relates to us, we can then begin to be set free from its influence in our life. So if we don't see what we're imprisoned by, we can't move out from it. So from the perspective of the heavenly doctrines, this centers on our understanding of two doctrinal concepts that we all will be familiar with, but maybe there'll be a little more light shed on it from what the doctrines have to offer. And those concepts are proprium and influx. So just have this reading here. This is from AC 7181 and 7178. So it just states that nothing is more important to a person than to know whether he has heaven within him or hell, for he is going to live forever in one or the other. And to know this, it is necessary for him to know what good is and what evil is. For good constitutes heaven and evil constitutes hell. Teachings about charity show what both are. And then from AC 7178, consequently, no one can examine himself unless he knows what good from its two loves is and what truth from good is, and unless he knows what evil from its two loves is and what falsity from evil is. So this is, it's just the fact that this opening statement is that there is nothing more important to know what good and evil are. And it's because being able to recognize this, we're then able to see the presence of heaven and hell within our own minds. So clearly the terms heaven and hell, they don't refer to physical places, but to states of mind. So what's arising from our minds due to its structure, with their patterns of thoughts and affections, beliefs and attitudes, these are all organized into a form which at the center sits our sense of self. How we hold that sense of self determines how things are organized at the level of our experience. So we're talking about what constitutes the natural level of the mind here. And that's where our work is, because that is where we are so far as our awareness is concerned. So heaven and hell within us depends on whether our mind is orientated toward love for the Lord and the neighbor, or alternatively toward a belief in ourself, grounded in the loves of self and the world as primary. So the practice of the word guides us by building our understanding of what good and evil truly are, including their origins and effects upon our lives. So without this foundational knowledge, we will not feel a need to examine what we take for ourselves. And so just point out that when I speak about life here, I'm not just talking about our outer actions, but also the quality of our inner world. That's where our real life is. That's the world that we live in, and it's largely hidden from outer observation. And the Lord in the Gospels, he speaks to this in the Gospel of Luke. chapter 12, verses 2 to 3. And it states this: there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither secret that shall not be known. Therefore, whatever things you have said in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which you have spoken in the ear in bedrooms shall be preached on the housetops. And also from Matthew 12, verse 36, it states that I tell you, every idle word people have spoken, they will give an account of it on the day of judgment. Now, the first of charity, according to the word, is to shun evils as sins against the Lord. So the first and primary aspect of charity is an inner work, and out of that follows the outer aspects of life. So without a clear understanding of what it is we are looking to shun, it's impossible to it's impossible to do that. You need an understanding. So shunning evils as sins is the core aspect of what constitutes a genuine spiritual life or practice. And the shunning of evils as sins is the only practice with eternal significance, according to what the word teaches us. So it's important to understand that no amount of external good deeds or even a perfect and moral upright life can substitute for the inner work of examining the self with a view to renouncing evils as sins against the Lord. So self-examination, and I just want to expand it a little bit, because we often think of this in terms of evaluating our actions and intentions, our thoughts and feelings, which is absolutely vital and necessary. But it also involves deeply questioning the very concept of the nature of what we take for ourself. So through making an examination of the self, we are put in front of the reality that truths teach, that what we take to be our sense of self, or what we refer to as I, me, myself, is not as substantial as we might believe. That our self as something substantial is in fact an appearance, and if it is believed to be such, it's an illusion, or probably probably more to the point, it's a delusion. And this is something that I believe we're put in front of continually, so far as the heavenly doctrines are concerned. So every page of the heavenly doctrines virtually deals with either who the Lord is or what the self is. And those two things we're being put in front of those constantly for a reason. And the main reason for that is because we constantly seek to avoid, deflect, do anything we can to avoid having to confront the nature of the self. So the importance of knowing what is good and evil are because our life depends upon it. So where does evil really come from? I mean, this is a question that human beings have been asking forever, right? So, and often it comes down to, like, is it some kind of external force that just gets into us? Or is it a bug in the sense of a fundamental flaw in our programming? And this is the big one. Could it be something we've just totally and completely misunderstood about who we are? So the heavenly doctrines, they provide us with the most coherent explanation there is, I believe, to understand the nature and origin of evil. Knowing the difference between good and evil, truth and falsity, is critical because it shapes our connection to others, to the Lord, and ultimately to eternal life. So this isn't just intellectual knowledge. It's highly practical so far as our eternal life is concerned. Mm-hmm. So, when we hear the word evil, our minds often jump to the big stuff, right? So we're talking about often, our minds jump to these monstrous figures from history, acts of atrocity, and they're almost impossible to get your head around, and that all makes total sense, right? There's no doubt about the evil nature of this, but the material we're digging into today says, hold on, this is not the whole picture. This isn't about large-scale historical atrocities, but something far more subtle and personal. And it's about the potential for evil residing within each of us. In everyday experiential terms, it's that constant internal pull towards self-centeredness. So it's about the stuff we don't see, or perhaps what we don't want to see. So, of course, the word evil is emotionally charged, and it's not a word we like to attribute to what we call ourself, despite the fact that it appears as a major running theme throughout the word. So we tend to want to avoid the issue where our own lives are concerned, largely because it's uncomfortable, right? And it cuts to the core of our self-image. Who we like to see ourselves as. So rather than examine ourselves, we tend to deflect. We project onto others what we think constitutes evil. And the bigger, the better, because we can then look at our own lives and comfort ourselves in the knowledge that we wouldn't do that, or we aren't capable of that, whatever that happens to be. Another strategy of avoidance and denial is to frame evils purely in moral or civil terms, in outward behaviors that others are involved in that perhaps blur the lines of what society expects or what doesn't align with whatever moral code we might subscribe to. But civil and moral evils, while they may be symptomatic of spiritual evil, are not in themselves spiritual evils. And it is spiritual evil that we are concerned with today. So spiritual evil is less about external behavior and more about how our minds are organized. So it's a condition every human being is subject to because it is inherent in the very structure of our sense of self when organized around the loves of self and the world. So believing in ourself as an autonomous, independent being is the central fallacy from which all evil flows. And the shocking thing is that prior to examining that self to discover its true nature, which is what spiritual life entails, evil lies hidden and forms the very basis at the natural level of what we call our identity. So the real issue is not that evil forms our external sense of self. This is unavoidable, but that we are blind to it, and through that which we acquire and call and make up our identity, we call it good. And this goes back to the instruction in the garden and what's written there about the serpent, that it ends up calling evil good and good evil. And this is and it's called the most subtle of the beasts of the field for a reason. And the reason is that the kind of evil, spiritual evil that we're talking about is not always that obvious. It's subtle and it remains as a hidden stream, organizing things in a way whereby it can protect itself. So while it remains hidden, or what we take for ourselves goes unexamined, there's little that the Lord can do. So we're instructed to examine that self, to examine ourselves. So all divine revelation is provided so that we can better understand the situation and look to the Lord to be set free. And so the Lord declares in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 47, "And if any man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. Okay, so let's just unpack this a little bit more. So the illusion of a self, pinpointing the problem. So to really get this, we have to look at two key ideas that are integral to this framework, this being proprium and influx. So first up is this word proprium. Yeah, it's a strange word for most people who are outside of the new church. And it's probably difficult to even define for those within it. But it's actually, I think it's fairly simple. If we take it as that the term refers to our sense of me, the I that you think you are. So it's the identity that we've built up over the course of our life, and we have fallen in love with it, and we will protect it against anything that seeks to unpack it for what it truly is. And so when you think about this, it's prior to entering into a life of self-examination and repentance, our whole sense of self has been built up out of the love of self and love of the world. So these loves are infernal loves when they have dominion. And so, we just have to confront the fact that the sense of self that we carry around that's been derived from those two loves is actually opposed to heaven and constitutes hell in us. So, this sense of self, it incorporates a whole narrative that we constantly tell ourselves about who we are. And it is also constantly projecting itself onto the world and onto others, looking to affirm itself as something substantive. And the very fact it has to do that says something about it, that, it's probably not substantive at all in its need to be constantly affirmed and praised, and all of that dominates this mode of life. But it's a core feeling that says, I am my own person, separate and independent. And particularly we in the West have a very strong sense of individualism. And so this teaching goes against a lot of what we find very comfortable so far as our cultural understanding of things is concerned. So in that sense, what the heavenly doctrines offer is radical. It calls all that into question. So there's a few things we probably need to get clear around this term. For the most part, we experience our sense of self as something fixed and rigid, but this is an appearance. Creation is constant coming into being. We are being remade moment to moment. And this is an important point. What we take to be ourself has no substantive reality in itself. It's purely an appearance, and it's maintained first and foremost by the Lord, and we'll explore a little more about that later. But when in a disordered state, the proprium expends huge amounts of energy to appropriate to itself what it needs to maintain the illusion that it is something substantial. So as far as our natural thinking and feeling is concerned, we really believe it to be substantial, despite all the teaching we find to the contrary in the heavenly doctrines. So it's a critical point, so far as the spiritual life is concerned, that we come to see that what we experience as our sense of self isn't something fixed. And because it isn't something fixed, it means that change is possible. If it was fixed, change would not be possible. If our sense of self was fixed, we would have no hope. So our sense of self is something being brought into being moment to moment, which means that every moment opens up a possibility to move toward a more genuine, expansive self. And this is reflected in what's called the heavenly proprium. That proprium, or that sense of self that the Lord seeks to give us. So that proprium that believes itself as something fixed, separate, and independent, and holds that its life is self-generated, is what is called the infernal proprium. And as we shall see, it is this that forms hell, and that hell from which we need saving if we're willing to take hold of what the Lord offers as a way of escape. So just a quote on proprium. So this is a definition from the AC, number 210. What is the proprium? The human proprium consists of everything evil and false that gushes out of self-love and love of the world. It involves people believing not in the Lord or in the Word, but in themselves. And they're imagining that what they do not grasp through sensory evidence or through facts does not exist at all. They become, as a consequence, nothing but evil and falsity, and so have a warped view of everything. Things that are evil they see as good, and those that are good as evil. Things that are false they see as true, and those that are true as false. Realities they imagine to be nothing, and things that are nothing they imagine to be everything. They call hatred love, thick darkness light, death life, and vice versa. In the word, such people are called the lame and the blind. This, then, is the human proprium, which in itself is hellish and condemned.
That hurts.
What was that?
I said that hurts.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, and it does, it's confronting for sure. But the second concept is that can flip everything on its head, is that of influx. And the concept is this: you are not the generator of your own thoughts and feelings or the author of your life. So every thought we have, every feeling we feel, every spark of creativity, none of it starts with us. All our thinking, all our willing, it all flows into us from a source outside of ourselves. And this flies in the face of the dominant mode of thinking our cultures emphasize. The idea that we are autonomous and self-made. I mean, this is the myth, right? The Western myth. The preciousness of our identity, which we see so much in today's cultural environment, in the form of identity politics. And we can see the true nature of it in that it divides and fractures things. And that's interesting when you pair it back to the term evil in Hebrew, which is ra, which means to fracture and separate. So, we see this at work and illustrated and all around us all the time. The drive to self-improvement, to enhance ourself. What self are we enhancing? Everything in our culture emphasizes the importance of me or myself, my independent agency. And it simply just reinforces the spiritual problem where myself is placed above all else. So all the ideas of our culture that feel so right for us, because we've been raised in it, in relation to our sense of self, is actually pushing us in the wrong direction, away from the Lord as the source of life. We are not the power plants. We are simply receivers or vessels for life. And that streams in from one single divine source. Mediated, yes, but always life is sourced in the Lord. So everything in the world closes, or everything taught to us or told to us from the world closes us off to that reality and puts ourself in place of the Lord. But we can't know this unless we have another source of knowledge. And that's why divine revelation in the form of sacred texts is so important. Without it, we remain imprisoned in the idea that we are divine or that we have life in ourselves. So We mightn't go around saying we are divine, but we certainly operate from the belief we have life in ourselves. And to have life in oneself is a definition of what it is to be divine, right? So, and to receive life from another is the definition of what it means to be finite. So we mightn't express things in these terms outwardly, but what's important inwardly is the core belief out of which our love for ourself is operating. So when our love for self dominates, it underpins and molds our life into a hellish form. It is this belief in oneself that turns all things, all life flowing into evil. A state that sees itself as the source of its own life can only produce what is evil and false because it's a claim that one is God, right? Even when that looks like what is good and true, and particularly what it feels good and true for us. So such a self is incapable of anything good and true because it has appropriated what is of the Lord's to itself and claimed it as its own. That's the core problem. So just coming to this number here, this is the Arcana Celestia number 5847. No man, spirit, or angel possesses any life that originates within himself. That being so, there is nothing he thinks or wills that can originate in himself. For a person's life consists in his thinking and willing, and his words and actions are the life that springs from them. There is only one life, the Lord's. It flows into everyone, but it is received in varying ways, its reception being determined by the character a person has given his soul through the life he leads. While a person lives in the world, he is providing an outward form for the most pure substances that constitute his interiors, so that one may speak of him bringing form to his own soul, that is, fashioning its character. This form determines how the Lord's life, flowing from his love towards the entire human race, is received. So this is a pretty remarkable number. Well, I felt it was when I came across it anyway, because, it holds a profound idea so far as our purpose for being here in the world is concerned. So it states, obviously, there is only one life, the Lord's. But it also states that the task for human beings in this world is to bring form to their own souls. It is to bring what is higher into what is lower, so that the higher can be held within the lower. The means by which this can be done is through acquiring vessels in the form of truths, principles, concepts from the word, and then living from them. So we might have been asking ourselves, if evil is so persuasive, then how is it that any change is possible? And it's the concept of influx that helps here. Yes, it's true that the belief in oneself draws in hellish influences, but we can, if we choose to, open our minds up to higher influences as well. But we first have to know that this is possible. And it's the word that provides us with that knowing, because angelic influences are much more gentle, more freedom-loving and respectful of human rationality than hellish influence, which has no concept of honoring the freedom and rationality of another. So it's when we respond to true ideas that this heavenly influence becomes amplified, making it possible to move away from our natural mode of being towards something more aligned with who we are meant to be. And the Lord arranges things so that this possibility is always open to us. But this new mode of being requires that we respond to what the word asks of us so that we can fashion a kind of soul in the natural mind that is receptive of heavenly life and influence. So we can perhaps now begin to see that the issue isn't in having a sense of self. That's not the issue. For without it, our regeneration would be impossible. But rather, it's believing in this sense of self as something that it's not. We are here in the world to give form to our soul. This is what we are responsible for, and it has eternal consequences. And this formation is tied up with our everyday responses to life. What we identify with, how we react to things, what we choose to embrace, what we identify with. It all makes a difference. So our responsibility isn't so much to be concerned with what's flowing in. We can't do anything about that. But it's about how we respond to what's appearing in our mental landscape. We can do something about that. We can assess it. Do we cherish the impulse? Do we act on it? Do we entertain it? Where are our thoughts taking us, etc. So truths from the word provide the power to choose life over death, to reject those things that aren't life affirming. So spiritual life isn't about stopping the input. It's about shaping the mechanism of reception. And we do that through engaging with the word. So this is really where the problem lies. It's the central conflict that we're all placed in. It's the gap between how things feel and what is claimed to be real. So we all experience, the feeling is powerful, right? That this is my life. These are my thoughts. It feels completely real. But the reality, according to this view, is the total opposite. Life is received. We are just vessels. So this is the main event, so far as this way of thinking is concerned. The origin of all evil is simply mistaking the feeling for the reality. That's it. So it's not some great monster from the outside. It's an inside job. It's a fundamental misunderstanding that we are all caught in. And this misattribution of the feeling of life arising in myself to be the reality is to believe the appearances of the senses over what the word says is true. This struggle to believe the word over what our senses communicate to us is as real as captured in the imagery of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Spiritually, this isn't an event in time, but a symbolic representation of the choice that faces us all at every moment. Will I trust in the Lord or the word, or in myself, the voice of the serpent? Do I love the Lord, or do I love the feeling of being an independent, autonomous being who is able to assess for itself what is good and true? This is really what this story is all about. It's the story of our life as it plays out in every moment of our existence. So the three states of self, there are three states of self, or three states of our sense of self. And I just want to explore those now. And they're captured in the following quote, which is from Arcana Celestia number 141. So, look, there's three of you. So perhaps you each can just read a section of this. So someone read the green, the top and the bottom. Then the next person can read the blue, and the remaining person can read what's in yellow. So
I can go first because that really speaks to me. All right. With the bodily mind and worldly man, the proprium is his all. He is unaware of anything else but the proprium. And as has been stated, if he were to lose his proprium, he would think that he was dying.
Can you and the last statement there as well?
Oh yeah. Whereas the proprium of the bodily minded man is hellish.
With the spiritual man, the proprium takes on a similar appearance, for although he knows that the Lord is the life of all, and that he confers wisdom and intelligence, and consequently the ability to think and to act. It is more a matter of something he says and not so much something he believes.
The celestial man, however, acknowledges that the Lord is the life of all, who confers the ability to think and act because he perceives that this is so, nor does he ever desire the proprium. Nevertheless, even though he does not desire, the Lord grants him a proprium, which is joined to him with the complete perception of what is good and true, and with complete happiness. Angels possess a proprium such as this, and at the same time utmost peace and tranquility, for their proprium has within it things that are the Lord's, who is governing their proprium, that is, governing them by means of their proprium. This proprium is utterly heavenly.
Utterly.
Thank you.
Utterly.
Yes.
So it's important to understand that there simply isn't an I that is created to possess life or consciousness in itself. This is the first thing. So the Lord alone is life, and so has life, is the only being that has life in himself. So far as the sense of I is concerned, the sense of me, myself, it's the inflow of life that gives rise to the experience of a sense of self. So the I or proprium, and this is interesting, the I or proprium is not primary. We tend to think that there is a self doing all this stuff, a self at the center that does stuff. But what we see from how it's laid out in the heavenly doctrines is that proprium is an artifact. It's a secondary, or it's a byproduct of the influx of life. For instance, the statement "I have life" is actually a fallacy. It is just simply not true, and any mind structured around this belief is organized in a way that aligns it more with a hellish form than it does with a heavenly one. There simply is no I that is conscious. Rather, consciousness gives rise to a sense of I, or an I sense, a sense of self. And this appearance of an independent self is what makes us other than the divine and provides us with the basis for loving the Lord in our labor freely, which is where our true sense of life is able to be experienced. So this number is not just about fixed states of being. It also illustrates a process, and there are many other numbers that show this. But the key element here is to see that don't think of these phases as permanent boxes that we get stuck in. This is more like a map, and it's a map that shows a potential journey from being totally trapped in that little I sense to finding this incredible, profound connection to the source of life itself. This is what the spiritual journey is about. It's about passing through these phases so that we can be set free from the belief in ourself and grounded in a belief in the Lord as the only self. So what we saw there is that, there is this natural self, natural proprium, natural sense of self. And this is where we all start. It believes life is its own. And it also believes that to lose this sense of self is death itself. Like it is just so grounded in its belief in itself that anything that seeks to undermine that is a threat, is regarded as a threat. So when we think about that, any teaching that this natural sense of self is confronted with that suggests that the self as an appearance is going to be resisted. There might be an intellectual compliance or acknowledgement, but intrinsically deep down, all ideas of the kind that we are exploring here will be unconsciously, if not consciously, resisted. So, when we come across these numbers and we read them, and pay attention to our responses, our emotional responses, we can often see this. So for this natural self, the very idea that a spiritual life involves inner examination of things is incomprehensible. Spiritual life is purely defined in natural terms, external behaviors, going to church, listening to sermons, social activism, good works. It all falls into the realm of external activity. What is not seen is that all this reinforces the self as something substantial. It's not saying that these things shouldn't be done, but they are no substitute for inner work. And where the inner is being attended to, that makes the outer something that is of true worth. So then we move to this idea of a spiritual sense of self. And this is a really interesting place to be, and it's what the heavenly doctrines largely deal with. And in this state, it is similar to the natural sense of self in a lot of ways, but there is an intellectual acknowledgement that all life flows in, that life is received from the Lord, but there is still the feeling that I am my own self, and that is still active underneath it all, that life is my own. And so there's a real sort of sense of tension existing in this state, but this state only comes into being for those who are actively engaged with the word with a view to examining their inner life. And so this is where genuine spiritual temptations begin to arise as the old self is being laid down so that the new can be established. And then finally, we have this idea of a celestial sense of self. And this is a state where one just doesn't know it, but it is clearly perceived. Like we feel it in our bones that life flows in. And it's at this point, or this state, doesn't even want a separate self anymore. In this state, it's all about receiving a sense of self from the Lord and being fully engaged with that, rather than possessing and defending a sense of self. And so this sense of self is often described as a state of rest and tranquility, because when the need to preserve oneself is given up, there's nothing to fight. There's nothing to defend, right? So it's what's termed a total reversal.
David, can I comment on something?
Yep.
Can you go back to the previous slide? I like the way that you couched about the celestial sense of self, because you wrote a separate sense of self, even when they don't desire, it is given. And I think some English translation, it's kind of confusing because they use the word proprium or the proprium, but I think Eliot uses a phrase, a proprium, which gives us the sense that it is a different sense of self, that is, which is different from the natural sense of self or spiritual sense of self, but it's a celestial, a new sense of self. And I think that's is one of the that's really good to have that distinction right there, because when I talk with some people, they might say, "Oh, yeah, so the proprium is the celestial proprium is something that is developing, or that grows out of the natural sense of self." And people might say that, but in fact, it's not evolving from that natural self, but it's a separate sense of self that is given by the Lord, and that distinction I think is really crucial, and so appreciate that.
Yeah. So the difference is that the natural sense of self has grown out of the love of self and love of the world as primary, or as its center, whereas a celestial sense of self is developed out of love of the Lord and love towards the neighbor. So and so is grounded in the word itself. So there's numbers that talk about, that sense of self is not us, it's the Lord in us. So yeah. So a total different quality. Yeah.
Yep.
I'll just make a point as well that we're talking about, I did point it out at the start, but I just want to sort of just draw your attention back to that. These are changes and developments within the natural. So we're not talking about the celestial heaven that we traditionally understand in the new church, or the spiritual heaven. We're talking about the building up of the natural mind to reflect that reality. So there is a natural, spiritual, and celestial level that has to be developed over the process of our regeneration. And that's what this transition through these different senses of self involves. Okay, so just want to touch on the topic of salvation, which involves being saved from yourself. Okay, so just slightly different emphasis here. So when we kick off, in terms of our spiritual and religious experience and this developmental process, this kind of describes our experience, I think, the experience of most people. That, so if you just read through that statement there, just think about it for a second. Does this sound familiar? It's the treadmill I think we all end up on. We try to be a better person. We define spiritual life in terms of making ourselves better. And the question is, what is that self that we're trying to make better, right? And when we do well, we feel good, but then when we fail, we fall into self-loathing. So you have this kind of vicious circle that moves between self-righteousness and self-loathing. And the issue is that the sense of self, that I that is natural, is at the root of it all. And that's why it's a constant cycle of feeling good, feeling guilt. Like we just have this cycle that we see expressed for many within church life. So, and I term this the merit guilt cycle, but it's the trap of self-improvement. And again, it comes back to, what is the self that we're trying to improve? And the problem here is that it is that I, or that sense of self, that proprium, that is always seeking to be the star of the show, trying to be the hero that fixes itself. So trying to pull itself up by its own bootlaces so that it will be accepted as something that can enter heaven. Whereas, like the whole teaching shows, that it has to die. Or it has to be realized that it is death itself, so far as the spiritual life is concerned. So, it's all captured right here in the statement from the Lord in Luke 9:24. So whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So this, it sort of hits the nail on the head, really. It points directly at this great reversal that we're talking about. And it's basically saying that the more desperately we try to save that little self, that natural sense of self, that identity that we've built up, the more we lose our connection to what is actually real, to real life. So this is the turning point, and it's sort of laid out here fairly plain and simple, I think. So the default natural view is that we are looking to have our identity saved, who we take ourselves to be. We want that to save, and so the goal is to try and fix it, or improve it, or make it better. But the spiritual view flips this. It says the goal is not to save your identity, but to be saved from it. So you're not trying to polish the cage you're in. You're trying to be set free from the cage itself. So the traditional view is that the Lord comes into the world to save me. And everything hinges on what we understand by that me. We want that me to go to heaven. But in fact, the Lord comes into the world to save us from that me, because that me is hell. And that is what the spiritual life is about, and why the word is so important, because it points out the very things we cannot see for ourselves because we are so immersed in what is opposed to what the Lord is seeking to do. So how is this achieved? Well, it's this concept of the as of self. You know, the heavenly doctrines, as far as I'm aware, is the only place you will find this concept. So the as of self is the feeling of an independent self given for the agency and given for agency and love, while knowing it is an appearance. And this is the secret key that unlocks the whole thing. It's a beautiful idea, this as of self, because it's the idea that, you know, we're given a feeling of being independent for a very, very good reason. It's a gift. It gives us a sense of agency. It gives us a sense of free will, so that we can choose to love and connect and to give back. We get to act as if our life is our own, but always remembering that in our hearts that it's an appearance. But when ordered, it's a beautiful appearance created for the sake of love and relationship, particularly our connection to the Lord. That is what the as of self is all about. So just from AC 154, it states this concerning the proprium. The contents of the proprium, which have been given life by the Lord, look beautiful, to which a celestial quality, that is the Lord's, can be added. So it is not that we have a sense of self that is the problem, as I mentioned earlier. It's what we do with it, how we interpret it, that becomes the issue. So the sense of self is absolutely critical to give us a sense of otherness, but it also means that it gives us a sense of freedom by which we can use our rationality to move toward loving the Lord and the neighbor. That's its purpose. The purpose of an as of self is so that we can do that. Now, you know, one of the interesting things about this is that if you look at Eastern religions that don't have the concept of an as of self, we become, you know, the idea is that we all are just part of the divine being and we become merged with it. Ultimately, that's the ultimate goal. In the West, where this idea is not available, we become gods, little gods unto ourselves, and highlight the idea of we are individual, autonomous beings, separate from all else, and we rule over all, or over the domain of our own sphere of influence. So it's, you know, so this beautiful truth that the Lord has brought through the heavenly doctrines is this concept of an as of self balances all that out. It's the middle path, and it's the way that maintains a sense of agency, but also establishes a sense of connection to the Lord and to others. So this is the critical element. So just in terms of summarizing this a bit, so what we have here in this, this table, like we see that for the false sense of self, the belief is I am the source. And the experience of life is anxiety, the need to control, the need to defend, isolation. You know, if we truly reflect on this, this is the result of it. A true sense of self, which is the as of self, is I am not the source. That's the center from which everything else flows. And that is freedom, peace, connection, tranquility. That's the fruit of that, because it is aligned with reality. whereas the false sense of self is opposed to it. So it can't but create problems. So it just lays it out, right? So it's like two doors, two completely different ways to live. On the one side, we have this false sense of self, and on the other, we have this true sense of self. The constant, this false sense of self is just this constant need to keep affirming and using others to bring about that affirmation, manipulating situations, controlling situations, particularly so that the true nature of myself isn't exposed, So this, this does make a huge difference in terms of our quality of life. And I'm just going to wind up now. And I just want to leave you with the question. I think that's pretty much central to the whole presentation, and it's this: what if that very self you seek to have saved is what the Lord is seeking to save you from?